To open the CD tray, 2.7 volts is input on pin 28 of IC201. This makes the output from pin 79 change to low, and this in turn is fed to pin 1 on IC601. This makes pin 3 low and pin 7 high. The loading motor is connected across pins 3 and 7, and the current flows from pin 7 via the motor winding to pin 3, so the motor rotates and opens the CD tray. The closing operation is much the same. 2.7 volts is again input to pin 28 on IC201, and the output on pin 78 goes low. This is fed to pin 9 on IC601, allowing pin 7 to change to low and pin 3 to high, and this means the current flow is from pin 3 to pin 7, reversing the rotation of the loading motor, and the tray will close. When the tray is in the open or closed stop position, pin numbers 78 and 79 on IC201 are both high. Forward turntable rotation is achieved by 3.1 volts being input to pin 28 on IC201. Pin 54 outputs a high signal, and this turns Q401 and 405 on, and Q402 off. The motor rotates and turns the turntable clockwise. Under the turntable there is a sensor, and its job is to detect the disc number and stop position of the turntable. To remove the turntable tray, look on the underside and turn this toothed wheel clockwise. This will drop the laser assembly and start the tray's movement. After it is moved about half an inch, you can pull the tray out until it stops. Disconnect the ribbon cable. Locate and press down on the two stopper clips, easing the turntable out. Press together the turntable retaining clips and it will drop out. Here you can see the sensor and the posts that pass between the send and receive sides of the sensor diodes. The output from the sensor is fed via pin 4 of connector 401 and connector 4 to pin 13 of connector 6 via the ribbon cable to connector 102 pin 13. Then on to pin 24 of IC201. Place your scope probe on pin 13 of connector 102, and you can check to see if the sensor is sending the information to the micro. On opening the tray, disc position 3 will always be placed to the rear, When the turntable rotates in the forward mode, there is a lot of forward inertia, so the disc position is overshot. This is corrected by a signal from the sensor to make the turntable reverse for about 0.2 of a second. You can just see a slight kickback. To check this, place your meter or scope probe on pin 12 of connector 102. This connects via R131 to pin 53 of IC201, and this becomes high, but only for a fraction of a second. You can see the scale on the bottom of the meter jump up, but the meter gating time is too slow to register a voltage. This turns Q404 and 406 on, and Q403 is switched off, and makes the turntable motor reverse. The instant reverse motion starts, disc 3's stop position pulse is fed to pin 24 of IC201. This turns pin 53 low, and in turn switches off Q404 and 406 to stop the reverse rotation. When the tray is closed, the operation is the same as in the open position. If, however, you close the tray with disc 1 in the play position, but without a disc in place, the mechanism will look for a disc and then move on to disc 2. Again, if there is no disc in place, it will turn to park in disc 3 position after checking to see if there's a disc in place. With the tray open, pressing the disc change button will rotate the turntable 120 degrees and stop. This operation is not possible with the tray closed. You will find that the tray will open on pressing this button. The voltages you can expect to see on pin 28 of IC201 are as follows. As you can see, R203 is a more convenient point to look at the voltages rather than taking a chance on shorting out the pins on the chip. To open the disc tray, 2.7 volts. Rotate the disc tray, 3.1 volts. Close the tray, 2.7. 4.2 volts selects disc 1. Disc 2, 3.8 volts. And for disc 3, 3.4 volts. To test for the output voltages from IC201, we recommend that you go to connector 102 on the front PCB or connector 6 on the CD PCB. Pin 9 is for tray closing operation, and this is low for a fraction of a second. Pin 10 is tray opening, and this is also low for a fraction of a second. Pin 11, turntable forward motion, and this is high for a fraction. And pin 12, reverse motion. This is also high, but remember all these voltages are only active for a fraction of a second. We would recommend that you use an oscilloscope to see this. Disassembling the mechanism is very easy on this deck. First you need to remove the main cam gear and the tray gear. Remove the tray gear first by pinching together the two halves of the clips on the underside. At the same time, pull from the top. You'll find these are a little tight at times. Now the same for the main cam gear. This is the slide mechanism cam and is used to raise and lower the turntable and laser assembly. If you are required to change this part, you will need to remove the PCB. To do this, lift off the tray relay gear. Then remove the belt. And then unscrew the two motor supporting screws. Turn the deck over and then gently unclip the PCB. Lift the board very carefully, as there are two ribbon cables on the underside to be disconnected, and they can be damaged if you're not careful. There is one lead left on the board, which is a thin twin cable. This can be left connected, or if you wish you can desolder it. To remove the laser assembly, you must pull back on the two clips on either side, and then gently lift the assembly and pull it back. This will now allow you to remove the slide mechanism cam. This should be moved to the right hand side and then it can be lifted off. Reassembly is very straightforward. Replace the slide mechanism cam and then the laser tray, making sure that you locate the pin on the tray with the track on the slide cam. And finally push down into position. You can now refit the printed circuit board. And of course, don't forget to connect the two ribbon cables from the laser assembly. Now replace the motor screws and refit the drive belt. Now drop the tray gear into position. On the main frame you will see a pimple. This is an indexing mark and must line up with an arrowhead on the main cam gear. You'll also see an indent on each of the two teeth at the point of the arrowhead. Now push the tray gear down into place. There's no indexing to worry about with this part. The next job is to match up the disc turntable with the tray. Make sure that disc positions 1 and 2 are to the front. Now align the top of the center gear with the arrow pointing to disc 3 position. Turn it over gently and place the turntable in position and press down. On the underside you should confirm that the two halves of the clip have come through. Now you can push the tray in, making sure that it sits correctly in the rails on each side of the chassis. Of course, not forgetting to connect the ribbon cable. Now you're ready to place the mechanism back into the main equipment, and with the drawer out about 1 inch you can replace the front fascia panel. Now plug the equipment into the main supply and switch on, and you will now see the deck go into a test sequence. This will involve checking each disc position, and this will happen every time the mains plug is removed from the power socket. As you can see, the turntable moves to each disposition and is physically looking for a disc. The turntable, the disc motor, will rotate about 3 times. Once this is finished, load up with discs and check that the discs are playing correctly and that things like the search and disc change works okay. The circuit description for the operation of this deck is much the same as the Ford GZ1, therefore we'll go straight into the practical demonstration. You cannot open the deck simply by pulling on it. You must first locate the lever on the underside of the tray and push it to its opposite side. Now you will find the deck will slide open. To inspect the turntable, remove the screw in the centre. Once out, the turntable can be lifted for checking. If you wish to remove the tray entirely, you must first push down on the 2 clips on either side of the deck. The deck can then be pulled out, but don't forget to remove the ribbon cable. In order to change any of the gears, you must first remove the joint cam. To do this, you must first take out the 2 supporting screws. And then remove the pull spring. Lift the joint cam from the front, and then when at 90 degrees, pull forward. Take off the belt. Now pull back the cam stopper and lift the cam gear off. As in the 4 GZ1, to change the rest of the gears, you must first remove the printed circuit board. This is done in the same way by removing the 2 screws supporting the motor. Turn the deck over. And gently unclip the PCB. As before, when you lift, look out for connecting cables. You may find these clips sometimes a little tight. And then on the underside you will see, of course, cables connecting the laser assembly, and as before there are two, with one small double lead which you can leave connected. In order to take out the load slider, first you must remove the load lever by pushing on this clip, and the lever and the slider will come out together. Next, take out the relay pulley, again by pushing on the supporting clip. To replace the tray lever, you must first remove the relay gear A. This is done from the underside by pressing together the two sides of the clip. As you can see, this can be a little slippery at times. It's now simple to take out the tray lever. And also relay gear B with its supporting plate. To remove the laser assembly, push the right hand side and left hand side cams to the back. The laser will then drop. Gently flex the stopper arm to remove the component. If at any time you need to replace the LEDs, you must first remove the reflector. This is done by taking out the single screw and then placing a screwdriver down the clips. This is not as easy as it looks. This can be extremely tight, and you will get the feeling that the thing will snap at any minute. However, they normally come off in one piece. When replacing the laser assembly, there are 5 points to consider. Firstly, the stopper arm, and secondly, the 4 notches, 2 on either side. The 4 notches must fit into the tracks on the right and left hand slider cams. The stopper arm fits into the disc clamping mechanism. This isn't very easy to see, but you can see that I'm placing a screwdriver into the slot to give you an idea of where to find it. Now place the laser mechanism into position, making sure that you get the 4 notches into the tracks. This can be tricky because the stopper arm tends to go into one of those tracks as well, so be very careful not to break this or force it as you're putting it in. And now you can see the stopper arm going into the track on the disc clamper. Push the laser unit to the back, making sure that the left and right hand slider cams are pulled forward. We will now install relay gear B and its associated components. Take relay gear B, already fitted to the gear plate, and drop it into position. Next, the tray lever. Make sure that this notch locates in the slot in the gear plate. Now take relay gear A and push this into the hole within the gear plate. This goes through the gear plate and the main chassis, holding the whole thing in place. Finally, the relay pulley. Push this down until you feel it clip into position. Next we'll fit the load lever and the load slide. We dismantled these as one part, but in fact they are two separate components. However, when you refit them, they must be fitted as one. Fit the two parts together as you're being shown. The hole in the load lever clips into the chassis at this point. The track in the load slider slips over a peg and the laser assembly housing. Watch this section closely and you will see the operation of these parts. You can now move this backwards and forwards to check the operation, but don't come back too far, otherwise you'll find the laser assembly will drop out the bottom. Now the protector lever. This has a notch on it, and this fits into a track on the load slider. Make sure that this is fully to the right hand side before you push down, and then ease the notch over into the track. You're now ready to fit the main cam. On this cam you will see tracks on both sides. The track on the underside is used to locate on the notch for the loading lever. This is the stop spring, which needs to be held back when placing the cam in place. Here you'll see an indexing hole, and this should be placed at about 3 o'clock. So hold the spring back and drop the cam into place, and then turn the cam so that the spring hits up against the stop on the cam wheel itself. Next, take the joint cam. The notch on the bottom of there fits in the top runner, the top track of the cam wheel. These hook parts fit under the notches on the left hand and right hand side of the slider cams. Make sure that the joint cam is pulled fully back towards you or towards the front of the deck, and the notch fits into the rear side, the back side of the track, and then replace the two screws. And finally, put on the pole spring. By manually turning the cam gear anti-clockwise, you can check the operation of the mechanism. Make sure you leave the cam in the correct position after turning it. It's a full 180 degree turn. Next you can fit the PCB, not forgetting of course to connect the ribbon cable and the plug from the laser assembly. Again, I remind you that the springs or the clips on this are particularly tough, so try to be as gentle as possible, but at the same time being firm. Obviously damage to the board is very costly, so try and avoid that as much as possible. Once the board's in, replace the two motor support screws. And then of course replace the belt. If you had reason to change or remove the LEDs, refit them, I can assure you these go back a lot easier than they come out. The reflector just clips down and refit the screw. On the turntable tray, this is the sensor, send and receive, which senses the timing slots on the turntable itself. That of course indicates which disc is to be selected. So the turntable simply drops back into place, and obviously replace the screw to hold everything together. There's no indexing to worry about when refitting the turntable. Before refitting the tray, you must make sure that the tray lever is in the correct position. This must be pushed to the right hand side as you look at the deck from the front. So offer the tray up to the main chassis, checking that the runners are correctly positioned, and gently push the tray in about halfway. Now connect the ribbon cable. And finally push the tray all the way in. You're now ready to test the equipment, so plug the equipment into the main supply and switch on at the standby button. As with the 4ZG1, there will be a test cycle. Once that's finished, open the drawer up and load up with some CDs and run the normal operational tests. We'll now show you some of the voltages you can expect to see when using the CD controls. Key 2 is the CD control input line to the microprocessor, and this goes in on pin 15 of IC201. First we'll look at the direct play buttons. Disc 1, 5.3, Disc 2, 4.9, Disc 3, 4.5, Disc 4, 4.2 volts, and Disc 5, 3.8 volts. Forward search is 2.3 volts, reverse search is 2 volts, play 1.6, and stop 5.8. Pause is 1.3 volts, and dubbing speed is also on the same key line at 0.9 volts. The outputs from the IC201 for the CD operations are all prefixed with the letter C. Most of these outputs you'll find are either high or low. They all come together at CON 502. The rest of the operation for the CD deck is much the same as the 4ZG1. We'll now take you through the 4ZG2 7CD mechanism. This is by far the most complicated of the 3 decks we've shown. If you have a jam, to remove the deck you will need to turn this pulley wheel clockwise to open the CD tray enough to remove the front fascia. With the equipment on its side you'll see 2 clips. If you gently ease these forward and then push up, you should find the fascia will come off quite easily. And turn the unit back up the correct way and return the deck to the park position by turning the pulley anti-clockwise. To get the deck out, there are 3 screws on the right hand side to be removed, and this ribbon cable. On the left hand side you will see 2 screws behind the holes in the PCB, so use a magnetic screwdriver and release these 2. Now lift the deck from the back, flexing out the 2 side cheeks and pull towards the back. 1 plug to be removed, and there you have the deck out clean, which you can work on the bench. To remove the laser assembly you have to remove the PCB. This is held in with 1 screw and some clips. These clips are not as harsh as previous models. Again, be careful when you're lifting the board up because there are cables plugged in underneath. Next, remove the 2 plugs from the laser assembly and the one from the motor board. 4 screws support the assembly. Remove those and you can then lift out the optical block in one piece. leaving the cradle behind. Turning this gear clockwise, you will open the CD drawer. You can see the LVR tray swinging to the left. Stop the drawer at about 3/4 of its full length out, and you will see a notch on the end of the LVR tray. This has to be lifted, otherwise this will stop the drawer from being pulled out. On the right hand side, on the main part of the chassis, there's a retaining clip which has to be put down, and then the drawer is released. Next, remove the screws on each side of the top cover which houses the two diodes. Flex the case back and pull it out. Don't forget to take off the plug, and then you can put that to one side. To go any further, you must now remove the motor PCB. This is done by desoldering the 4 connections for the 2 motors and the 3 connections on the sensor PCB. Next, remove belt C. And now you will find 3 screws which are visible, which are supporting the bottom case. Remove these. And now release the PCB. There's one more screw to remove before you can take the bottom case off. Although this can be seen through the printed circuit board, you still have to take the board off in order to remove the bottom case. Once the case is off, you can see the up and down gears. First, remove gear D, and then C, and this one is also gear D. Now this particular part is the cam box gear 1. Now these look the same but they're different, and when you take this out, be careful because there's a spring in the bottom of it, and these springs are different as well, so make sure that you keep the spring with the correct gear. And this one is cam box 2. The reason they're being unscrewed is because the CD rack is still in situ. Once those gears are out, the rack can come out. This is pulley A, and this is B. Now to remove gear B, you have to take the sensor out with it. Now we're going to take apart this array of gears. First thing to do is to turn the deck on its side, because you need to be able to pinch together the clips on the underside. The first one we're taking out is gear A, and you can see this is quite a slippery character. And you can see there the clips. Next is gear B. Gear C simply lifts off. And next we'll remove the cam. Again, this is done from the underside, and the clip is a long way down, but on the cam gear there's only one side which you have to push over, because it's virtually physically impossible to get anything down there to pinch together. So this comes out reasonably easy. There you can just see one side of the clip was there. Now we'll take out gear D. Probably thinking to yourself this is going to be quite a headache to reassemble, but they're not too bad actually. It looks worse than what it really is. There again, you'll have this tape to help you along your way. This is gear F, and this unclips from the top. Take the belt off, and out it comes. You'll probably find that once you've done one of these decks, you should be able to dismantle, repair and reassemble in around 35 minutes. This pulley that I'm turning now is the relay pulley for the tray open and closing mechanism. There's no indexing on this whatsoever. You can just take out these parts without having to worry about how they're going to go back together again. All you're concerned with, of course, is whether the teeth are damaged or not. There's one last part to come out, and that's the relay pulley. There are teeth on the bottom of this, so obviously you would need to inspect these in case of a fault. Remember, if you get a tooth that's jumping, you could throw the whole thing out of index, so check for wear and tear or physical damage. To remove the motors, obviously take out the 4 screws, which we'll not bother to show you now. The only other part which you may need to replace is this slide mechanism, which raises and lowers the laser assembly. If you want to take out the cradle, there are some very tough clips on each side of the cradle, and a strong thumbnail is required to hold these back while you take the cradle out. So that more or less completes the disassembly of this 7CD mechanism. So now we'll start to put the whole thing back together again. These are the first parts that we're going to show you. As remember, I explained the springs were different for each side, as well as the worm gear. So the smaller one goes in position for cam box 1, which is the one towards the centre of the side, and the long one will go into the cam box 2 position, which is the one up in the corner. Now these two cam gears, or worm gears, are different. And the way to identify them is if you look on the top, you will see that this one has two notches. There's one there and one there. And at the bottom there's a line which is used for indexing purposes. And the one with the two notches goes to the top corner, cam box 2. And if you look at cam box 1, you will see that this is only one notch. And an indexing line at the bottom. Try and put them in so that the indexing line lies flush with that edge. But they will probably move while we're putting the other bits in anyway. So next you want gear B along with the sensor. As you can see, it has a hole in it so that the light can come through to sense at the appropriate time. That should line up with the hole in the chassis. At this stage it's not important, but you might as well put it over the hole to remind you, just to make sure. Put a screwdriver through. Next, take gear C. Now this has two holes in it. There's one large one, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, and that must line up down through gear B and the chassis. And this is when it becomes important. So once in place, just put a screwdriver through just to confirm that they are in the correct phase. Next, take one of the D gears. There's no indexing there. And just press them down. Because of the spring-loaded worm gears, this now gets a little tricky. But it's very important that the indexing of those worm gears is correct, because the tray won't run smooth when it goes up and down. Finally, put on A. Now here you can see there's no way that is going to work. So what you have to do is push down and put the gear over the top. Same on the other side. Now don't worry too much at this moment in time about the indexing. Get the bottom case and just sit it on top and hold it down. Now you can see that the indexing marks aren't correct. So by just gently letting the case drop, on this side it's okay. But on the other side you can see it's out. So just by gently lifting and turning the gear, you can get it into the correct position. Once in the correct position, put a screwdriver down through the hole in the chassis to confirm that nothing's moved on the sensor, and then push down and hold together. Turn the deck over and replace the screws. Out of those 3 screws there is one long one, and that has to go in this position. So that's the 3 screws back, and finally the one that goes under the motor PCB. So you should have put 4 screws in altogether. And then refit the belt. Now we will refit the cradle for the laser assembly. So the notch there, that must fit in to the slider rail. And then that lip must go into that slot there. So gently put that into position, and with a fair bit of force you have to press down at the back so that it goes in those clips. Just check that it's free, and that's that section finished with. These 3 components are for the CD drawer opening and closing mechanism. So first, drop this one in. There's no indexing to worry about. All these gears just drop into place without any problems. The indexing comes when the drawer goes back in. There is a little gear that you have to make sure is in the correct position. So this is very straightforward. All the time when you're putting these gears and handling them, of course, make sure that everything is okay, there's no wear and tear or broken teeth. Because if there is wear and tear and a gear is slipping, you're doing all this work for nothing. Because the indexing will go straight out the window and things will go wrong and you'll wonder what you've done. But I've taken this deck apart now probably a dozen times, and every time I've put it back together it works straight away without any problems, providing that you follow the instructions to the letter. So put the screw in and screw it down. Don't you wish you could do it like that? And finally put the belt on. So next we're going to change this maze of gears. First of all, take gear D, put it in position, and this pushes down, and you should feel it clip into position. If it doesn't clip into position, you've probably got a broken catch underneath and the gear would need replacing. Secondly, this is gear C. Now this should be fitted with those 2 marks pointing straight down to the bottom of the deck, and drop those in. Next, gear B. Now this has 1 tooth missing, and you can see there that there is a line. Just see it's not very easy white, but there's a line on there which goes straight down, and the hole where the tooth is missing should be at 3 o'clock. Again, this one clips into position, so you should feel quite a firm catch as you push down. Next is gear A, and this has an index mark on it, or index holes. Again, they should be facing straight down. And and they should in fact line up with the lines on gear B. And this can be a little bit tricky to get this right the first time. But there you go, it's gone in this time. Just check freedom of movement. Next is gear F. And that drops down, and remember this one was clipped from the top. And it's important you put them back in this way, because if you don't, you're not going to get them all in. Now I'll refit the belt. And the next one to go is the cam gear. As you can see here, there is an indexing hole, and that has to line up with the screw head on that pulley. That lever there must fit into the cam track. Can be a little tricky sometimes to find the right positioning for it. As you can see, the other gears have moved, so just make sure, hold everything together, make sure that that slider gear is down, and gently push down into position until you feel it grip on the clip. And there you are. One more gear to fit here, and that is gear E. And there's no indexing to worry about with this one. Just drop it straight in. And of course there is a screw to support that. You're now in a position where you can replace the board, solder up, not forgetting the 3 sensor connections, and now you can refit the CD tray. And drop the gear in. There's no indexing on that one, but this little black fellow here is. But first you need to take base part of the tray and connect his ribbon cable, which goes through this slot, and that connects into the receive sensors via this plug. You remember we took off the top cover, which had some send diodes in, and this is the other end, the receiving end. Now when you replace this, there's a notch here which must fit into the square hole in the side of the chassis, and then on the other side to that there's a hook, which you can just see there, and that hooks under in a slot just there, so it acts as a sort of a hinge. So you put the notch in on the right hand side first, after you've connected the ribbon cable, and hook the left hand side under. So there you can see. And then at the front you just press down and it will clip together. Now this is a gear which must be indexed, and the indexing point is, you can just see at 3 o'clock there's an indentation, an elongated one, as the light reflects off it. You can see it there. That must be at 3 o'clock. Once you're happy that's in the right position, just put the screw in. Now, by turning the up and down motor anti-clockwise, you will turn the worm gears to open up to enable you to let the CD tray box to be loaded. It has notches on either side which sit in tracks on each side of the chassis, and by holding it with your hand and turning the pulley, you can just see the tray is starting to go down. And what happens is it'll go down and stop, and go down and stop until it hits the bottom. Now it's time to refit the CD tray. Align both sides with the tracks. Push in gently. Now at this stage you will have to lift the little notch on the LVR tray just to get it over the runner, and then that should drop down and you can close the tray, and you will feel that click into position. Now take the top cover section with the send diodes in, not forgetting to plug them in. Place this into the position. Remember that this clips in on both sides. And then replace the two supporting screws. Next, replace the laser assembly and the 4 screws and the main board, and finally the top cover. So you're now ready to refit and test. Apply the power switch on, and like all the other ones you've seen in this film, it will go through an initiation ceremony. Once this is done, load up with CDs. Recommend that you put a full load of 7 in, and run a complete function check, including search, next track, etc.